Hello, it's Robert again. And it's been way too long since I've been with you, but wanted to take an opportunity to say hello again and share a few gems with you, country gems. As you know, I love the country music all through the 20s, up into the early 60s, and a few scattered areas then on. So I'm going to share some things with you, and then maybe you've seen them before, some you may not have, but I hope you enjoy. I'm going to start off with the Johnny Cash album from 1960. Now, there was a song. The interesting thing about this Johnny Cash album, he has a Tennessee 2 with him, but he also has a steel guitar and fiddle, which you normally do not hear on Johnny Cash records. Very nice album. He has Don Helms on the steel, Gordon Terry on the fiddle, does nice versions of Why Do You Punish Me, and I Will Miss You When You Go, Transfusion Blues, Seasons of My Heart, and many more. Very early Columbia Johnny Cash LP. And then we have an album of Ann Jones. And you may say, who's that? And she recorded for Capitol in the late 40s. And then she went to King Records in the early 50s. And these songs are taken from that era. She was known for having some songs that were a little bit on the risque side at the time. She had a nice sound, nice musicianship. She had her band, the American Sweethearts, did songs like Knockin' Blues and Highballin' Daddy, and other songs, Big Fat Girl Like Me, and they're on here as well. So it's a very nice listen and a chance to enjoy a nice unique sound with Ann Jones. And then we have another King album from the late 50s, and this is the York Brothers, Leslie and George, and they recorded from back in the late 30s, recorded for different labels, made a couple nice 78s for Bullet label, which I have, especially a version of Hamtramck Mama, which was fairly popular. They went to King then and had a number of fine recordings. Nice version of Tremblin'. They had a version of Kentucky. They had River of Tears. Those are all on here, and they could put a little touch of R&B in their sound as well. But they made a lot of fine albums and records, songs for King in the 40s and the early 50s. And then we have nice Porter Wagoner album. Now, I love Porter Wagoner's sound in the 50s. In the 60s, I loved his TV show and the sound that he had. But what happened so many times, the records he made, they tended to have that Nashville sound overproduction in the 60s. You would hear the piano and the chorus and the drums and so forth. A couple live albums from that time that they were recorded in the studio with overdubbed applause. This here is the real deal with Mac Magee, Buck Trent, and Don Warden, George McCormick. Very nice album, good idea of what the Porter Wagoner show was in the time. One Way Ticket to the Blues. Mac Magee does Turkey in the Straw with Buck Trent. His version of Old Camp Meeting, Sally Gooden. What's nice, I like, is Green Green Grass of Home, because you often hear the record, which had that Nashville sound production, but here you hear it differently with that traditional sound that he had with the Wagon Masters. So nice album to listen to if you get a chance. From the late 50s, this was a nice Chet Atkins album. This did not have too much of the overproduction with it. It was more of a minimal sound. This came out in 58. And a Living Stereo, RCA, those albums can get a little tougher at times, but a nice version of Rainbow and Country Style and Show Me the Way Back Home, Country Gentleman. It was a re-recording, but they were still nice versions and a nice album to listen to from that era. You start getting a little bit later than this, then they're not as much enjoyable to listen to. But this is still a nice album. And then from 64 came what I thought was the last top quality Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs album. This had still that earlier Foggy Mountain Boys sound. The next album they made after this in 65 had Charlie McCoy on the harmonica. And though a couple of those albums were still good, it was a little different touch to their sound. But this is still, without all that, the straight ahead Foggy Mountain Boys. Amber Tress's Tied in Blue is a nice number. Train That Carried My Girl from Town. Earl Scruggs does a nice guitar version of the Georgia Buck. This is a very nice album. And actually, it's a little better than a couple of the albums they made right before that. And then we have Dolly Parton from 1970. And this was a live album that she put on in Sevier County, Tennessee. And she had a lot of nice songs. She did My Blue Ridge Mountain Boy and Put It Off Till Tomorrow. On the second side, Porter Wagoner comes out. And of course, he acts like it's a surprise. And then they do a few songs together. but a very nice live album, actually, of Dolly Parton. And then we have what is very tough to get country album, late 50s. One of the first country album releases, LP, was Bonnie Lou Sings. Bonnie Lou had a little pop touch to her songs in the early 50s for King. Still had a country sound. Had a couple hits, Tennessee Wigwalk, Seven Lonely Days. But this is a very nice album. The West Side label from UK released a CD some years ago, actually, of her career. And so it's nice to hear some of these songs, a little different, but still a nice sound. Good luck trying to get this one in real nice condition. And then we have one of the early Hawkshaw Hawkins King releases, Volume 2, and I also have Volume 1. Doghouse Boogie was on here, Life Lost Its Color, All Because of My Jealous Heart. Did a good job on Hank Williams' song called Elijah. Hawkshaw Hawkins made a lot of fine records for in the 40s for King. In the early 50s, went on to RCA, made some nice ones there. And then finally Columbia, then finally back to King for one last LP. Like what Eddie Stubbs used to say, he did a lot more for country music than die in the same plane crash with Patsy Cline. Then we have a nice Webb Pierce album. It's not on Decca, but it's a nice, it's on the label Castle. It's nice sound quality to it. It's the unadulterated early takes, and it lives up to its title. These songs here were the first songs he recorded in '49. He recorded for the Four Star label. And the 78s for years was the only way you could get those recordings as they were made. Heebie Jeebie Blues, High Gear Daddy, I'm Happy That You Hurt Me, Georgia Rag. When they were released on King and Hilltop and a variety of labels in the 60s, they were all overdubbed. They had extra fiddle, they had extra drums in there, and some had a little chorus, and it just was not like the old records. So finally, this label did this, and you can get the recordings as they were made in good sound quality. And actually, interestingly, on the Four Star, he did not use a fiddle on these, whereas the Decca, the fiddle was seemed to be his main instrument. And then we have Benny Martin on the Mercury Wing label. The Mercury Wing label released a few country releases, and there's only thing on the back is pictures of albums you probably wouldn't want, and no liner notes, just a label number. But the music is fantastic on this. His original version, or the version of 1954 of Me and My Fiddle, one of his standout cuts is on here, along with a number of his other songs. He had, shortly before signing with Mercury, had gotten off from playing with Flatt and Scruggs, and then he began to record some on his own on Mercury. And these are very fine recordings, nice sound. He played the guitar on some, played the fiddle, especially on Me and My Fiddle. And so a very nice listen, a chance to hear some of the early Benny Martin music. And then we have Dwight Yoakam, one of his albums from around 89 or 90. I think this is the last one, if I'm not sure, to be released on LP. Everything was strictly CD after that. Turn It On, Turn It Up, Turn Me Loose, and The Distance Between You and Me. Actually, a couple of my particular favorites on this. That nice sound with Pete Anderson's guitar work. And then we have the bluegrass band, the Hillmen. They had recorded some songs back around 63, 64. Vern Gosdin was their lead singer. He was, of course, a popular, good country singer in the 60s and 70s. Chris Hillman played the mandolin. And shortly after this album was recorded, Chris Hillman got involved with starting the rock band The Byrds. But this is a very fine album. Winsboro Cotton Mill Blues is on it. Roll On Muddy River, Ranger's Command, and others. A very nice sounding bluegrass album. The songs kind of stayed in the can for some years. In around 69, I believe it was, the label Together then released this album of their sound. Of course, and they've been released over and over on Sugar Hill label and some others. So you can get these songs, but very nice bluegrass recording. And why it wasn't released at the time, I don't know, but it's a very fine album. And then Reno and Smalley. This is from '61. Want It had the popular version of Love Please Come Home. Their instrumental Pick and Hold, Bells of St. Mary's, Tennessee Stump, nice version of Steel Guitar Rag, and many others. This is the original stereo. Also have the mono copy of this as well. But really love that old Reno and Smalley sound. And talking about Reno and Smalley, again among the first King albums was instrumentals. And that featured early 50s instrumentals, Choking the Strings, Hen Scratching Stump, Banjo Riff, Cumberland Gap, Max Hoedown, and others. That's that classic Reno and Smalley sound, and you just really get a touch of Don Reno's banjo playing, and sometimes I have to admit, I think there's an edge on him over Earl Scruggs. He did things on the banjo that nobody else was touching at the time. Nice early Star Day album from around 61. Robert Lund, original Talking Blues Man, was a piece that he sung a lot on the Grand Ole Opry, traveled some with the Roy Acuff Show, and on this album he's backed up by the Foggy Mountain Boys. The original Talking Blues, nice version of that is on here, as well as Sweet Ballads, Courtin' in the Rain, Mama Don't Allow No Music, and many others. Now, he did do a couple 78s in the 40s for Mercury, but for the most of his career he didn't do any recording. And then finally he recorded this in the very early 60s, and he died not too long after this album was made. But it was a very nice touch. You got an idea of his entertaining style. And then we have, from the late 60s, Billy Joe Spears. Had a hit in the early 70s with Mr. Walker, It's All Over. He's had a number of popular songs right from that era. If you get this album, Get Behind Me, Satan, and Push. It's my favorite number on here. And it's a good album. Pretty much overall. It's not a real pop-ish album or Nashville sound type album. It's a Capitol album of some of her good cuts from that time. And then we have a nice Japanese release from some years ago of J.E. Maynard's Mountaineers. And they were kind of in between, from the string band sound of the 20s to the bluegrass sound of the 40s. But they were a fine band. Wade Maynard was with them, Daddy John Love, Zeke Morris, and others passed through the band. But you get Gathering Flowers on the Hillside, John Henry Was a Little Boy, Mansion on the Hill, and then a lot of these fine numbers that they had done over the years. So this is nice. This is the early stuff. The liner notes are in Japanese, but the song titles are in English. So if you had the album, you know what you're getting. And then go with a compilation album here. Nice album from the mid-60s, and double set of Stars of the Grand Ole Opry. And there's actually quite a few songs that hadn't made it to albums. Some of the early compilation albums, I like going after them because they did have songs that didn't make it to other LPs. And there was a nice variety on here because Bradley Kincaid and Ernest Stoneman was on here, along with Hank Snow and Chet Atkins, Archie Campbell, Uncle Dave Macon, Lonzo and Oscar, the Willis Brothers, Pee Wee King, and many others on here. Original recordings with the recording dates, nice booklet inside. This is a very fine LP or double set. And then finally, I'll share one more. This came out in 46. A nice 78 RPM album, 478s of Merle Travis. He was popular in the 40s with he had many hits, and I liked him. They had the muted trumpet was in the backup a lot of times, accordion, a steel guitar. But in the studio with this, he used just him and his guitar. And so John Henry, 9-pound hammer, 16 tons, and many others came out of this. They were released later on an LP in the 50s called Back Home. But this was a fine album. This no doubt was what Tennessee Ernie Ford was listening to when he pulled a version of 16 tons off of this. So nice, very early Merle Travis. Not an LP, but 78 RPM album. So that's what I had to share with you today. And I'll look forward to, hopefully I'll see you again soon. My wife and I are right busy, a lot of things, so sometimes I don't take the time that I should. But I love sharing the old country, classic country, hillbilly music. I loved it all from all those different decades, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, some of the 60s. Just it's interesting to get into the different artists, the styles, the inroads, the contributions they made over the years. And so I hope that it causes you to kind of go to YouTube and look up some of these. Some of the records, to get them in the classic shape, they're not cheap. It gets me, a lot of people trying to sell old country, and they'll say it's not worth much. It's worth $1 or $2. but that's not the case. Depends on what you get. If you're getting Kenny Rogers album, yeah, that's true. If you're getting an original Hawkshaw Hawkins King LP, or Moon Mulligan, then that's not true. But take the time to really enjoy the music. So thank you for listening and watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Please take care of your families. Have a good day, and hopefully we'll see you not too long distance. Thank you now. Goodbye.